Well, hello, folks. I'm Ron Mazurski, the founder and board member of NYPAY and a partner in Pagility Advisors. I'm happy to welcome you to NYPAY's The Impact of ISO 20022 on the Financial Services Ecosystem event. Just so for those of you that don't know, NYPAY presents these monthly events that are a combination of networking and educational events and focus specifically on the financial services industry. We're a community of senior executives and innovators in payments, fintech, and in banking. Today, we're going to start off with an expert panel on ISO 20022, and then we're going to follow with one or two networking sessions where you can meet panelists and other attendees at the session. We hope you guys will all stick around for that second part, which will last 20 minutes to a half hour. I want to thank our sponsors, Davis Wright Tremaine and Further Advisory. And finally, I want to introduce you to our moderator for tonight's session, Barry Tooker of Transaction Banker and a member of NYPAY's Events Committee. He'll be, as I said, moderating today's events. We're going to start with his introduction to our panelists and to the event. And let me hand it off now to Barry. Thank you.
Ron, thank you very much, and good evening to everybody. As Ron said, my name is Barry Tooker. I'm with transactionbanker.com, and we are a payments consultancy. The adoption of ISO 20022 messaging standards has had a profound impact on the financial services ecosystem, transforming the way financial institutions, market infrastructures, and other stakeholders conduct business and interact with each other. ISO 20022 has transformative impacts on the financial services ecosystem, driving standardization, interoperability, efficiency, and compliance across the financial processes, systems, and services. These players are embracing ISO 20022 adoption to realize the full benefits and opportunities it offers in modernizing and advancing the financial services industry. Today, our panel of industry-recognized experts will address these impacts from each of their own unique perspectives. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, their companies, and their roles. Miriam, if I may, I'd like to start with you.
Sure, thanks, Barry. So Miriam Sherrill, I am the head of product for a company called Form3. So Form3 is a payment processing gateway provider. We started in the UK with faster payments over there, did some back stuff, went into Europe, and then just recently entered the US. And obviously kind of entering with FedNow and RTP, which we all know is already kind of using ISO from the gate, but also working on Fedwire, right, which has the ISO migration going on. So lots of ISO essentially in our work.
Thank you. Ken, over to you.
Sure thing. Great to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. My name's Ken Wong. I'm from TD Bank based in Toronto. I look after product strategy innovation for the Global Transaction Bank in Toronto. I'm also the BAFT co-chair of the BAFT Payments Committee. And I've been in this space for about 35 years now. I'll hand it off to Michael.
Thanks, Ken. Hello, everybody, and good evening. Thanks for having me on this event tonight. My name is Michael Knorr. I'm from Wells Fargo Bank, and there I'm as part of the Global Treasury Management business, an industry and advisory leader, but I'm also the co-chair of the Global Payment Market Practice Group and the CPMI Joint Task Force on ISO 2022 harmonization, and a member of the CPMI Cross-Border Payments Interoperability Task Force. So this is long-term, PI for short. And glad to be here and handing it over to
Elspeth.
Elspeth, sorry.
Hi, I'm Elspeth Bloodgood, and I'm a senior product manager at Jack Henry, which is a processor company that is devoted to supporting community financial institutions, whether they be banks or credit unions. So I have been working with the Pay Center organization, which is our hub allowing financial institutions access to the RTP and FedNow networks, as well as participate as a treasurer on the board of the Faster Payments Council. So I bring a little bit of the processor viewpoint to making ISO 20022 available.
Again, thank you all for agreeing to be part of this discussion tonight. Elsbeth, I'm going to stay with you. Why is ISO 20022 important to the financial services industry and the customers?
Well, ISO 20022 provides a backbone where you can have standardization that's going to make it easier for different financial institutions worldwide to interconnect. So it provides that technical surety that allows you to translate information back and forth between systems and know that you're getting kind of the same thing. We have historically had a file-based approach with NYPAY, right, or the standards used for the card rails. This is just a new standard that contains a lot more information. It's a lot richer data. It is, an international standard and not a national standard. And it's just going to allow everyone to interact in the payments ecosystem in a way that's going to reduce costs for everyone involved.
Miriam, from your point of view, why is this important? What makes this different than some of the other standards that are out there?
Well, it's what we're seeing is that it's a standard that can be leveraged across multiple payment rails. So as an example, Miriam talked earlier about how it's going to be used to underpin FedWire. The clearinghouse just released with the same day release their ability to do chips on the ISO standard. And in their first days, we're doing hundreds of trillions of dollars with a hard cutover. So it is, it has a framework that's extensible enough that it can be leveraged not just over as payment rails, but leveraged past the payment rails and into things like ERP systems, into fraud mitigation tools and that sort of thing, so that you can take that same data load and leverage it across the ecosystem, not just as part of the payment rail.
Sorry, go ahead, Miriam.
Go ahead.
Add in just a bit there. I think everything else was said is 100% accurate. Looking at it beyond just, I guess, some of the different systems that are doing it, but just from a financial institution's perspective of what it gets to streamline. I think we've all, some of us said the years we were in the industry, some of us purposely not, but we've all seen this for a while, right? There's, on FedWire, you had FAME, and on CHIPS, you had a different version, and RTP and FedNow are both on ISO. Again, and I think later we'll probably get into that even when you're on ISO, there are still differences, but putting that aside for now, instead of banks having to worry about all these different, formats, all these different standards out there, by trying to have one more global standard that all the systems can utilize, financial institutions, whether, and even beyond the financial institutions, right? Even the companies that have to end up utilizing this and start streamlining all their solutions, all their expertise, all their training around one standardization. So we're not there yet because we're having the migrations, like Elspeth just said, CHIPS just went, FedWire is going next year. But eventually, as we go there, there should be more and more streamlining and efficiencies that a bank can get from staffing, training, systems, data, across the board. And obviously, I think the ultimate goal is a more global outlook. I think that's what everybody's really waiting for it to become, and that's going to take some time. So I just wanted to add that in.
And, end-to-end processing without having to interrupt in the middle.
So Ken, from your perspective,
ISO, whatnot, the key here, what everyone talks about is the standard. So I think the best way to illustrate that, let's bring it to a practical and real example of what standardization can do. Look at normal cross-border payments today. Everyone complains, hey, it's slow, it's expensive, data doesn't go through, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right. But then if you look at the cards business, where they have a standard message format, so happens it's not ISO 2022, it's a different ISO standard, but everything goes instantly because everyone's talking the same language. Go one step further, you have Visa and MasterCard. They can interoperate too because they're using the same ISO standard, right? So we, from a banking perspective and I guess a cross-border and normal market infrastructure perspective, have agreed to adopt ISO 2022 because there are limitations on the credit card network one from a data perspective. And if you take that example from a cards network, say, hey, if I adopt the same standard, I use it in a, I guess, standardized way, we can make payments a lot better, a lot faster, and the data will go through.
Michael, from your perspective.
Yeah, well said, Ken. Right? And yesterday talked about something called sort of like a zero-touch approach, right? That we would like to get to it. Card networks, that's what we have, right? There's nobody worrying about repairs in a sense, right? Yes, there'll be sort of eventually returns and so forth, but really within the process, everything is fully automated, right? And hopefully that can be also achieved here on the ISO level with our initiatives. A little more work to get done, as Miriam explained. There's some slight differences here and there that we still got to work out, but I think we're well on the way, right, to get there, because we do have right now a lot of the international sort of corporations and as well as groups sort of together to really align themselves, have these discussions, what we need to change, what sort of alignment still ahead of us. So hopefully, right, that we can sort of deliver on that roadmap, right, going forward.
So Michael, staying with you and picking up some of the things, what are you seeing as the biggest challenges to adopting and actually implementing ISO 20022?
Yeah, part of it's a little bit the approach, right? If you approach it just as a messaging exercise and you tend to translate or try to translate from your legacy formats, right, into ISO and back from ISO into your legacy formats without making really underlying changes, right, in your processing to align with the ISO business model, then this is a big challenge. But that also means re-engineering your processes. I know this is not easy, right? So it's a little more complex. Of course, right? Initially, depends when you started. This re-engineering, doesn't come easy, and you might initially, right, go through the translation route. But the goal should be native ISO processing, supporting the ISO processes and messages sort of from an end-to-end perspective, because that's when you get really the advantage, right, of having these common data elements, recognizing them also in your internal systems, and fitting them into your sort of business processes, right? Sort of if everything is done just on a translated basis, that's much harder. You have a lot of data issues then, and not everything will nicely fit, right? So that's definitely sort of a big challenge, and that also means there's more education required. And therefore, events like this are critical, right, to get the word out. Because it's clear, it's a little bit scary. Oh my God, I used to use Fedwire, I used to do chips, I used to do classic MT messages, and now this thing comes along. Everything looks initially very different. So there is a learning curve. But once you've overcome this, then switching from, oh, this is the Swift ISO message to Fedwire ISO or Target 2 ISO or whatnot, and taking a look was so much easier, right? It becomes the natural. Yes, there are minor differences, but much easier to understand. And obviously, whatever business process you've driven around it, if you need to think about it in another currency, for example, becomes so much quicker and easier. So that's really where the efficiency comes in. But that's an education, right? That's a little bit the learning curve that everybody has to go through.
And what are you seeing up? What are you seeing up in Canada?
Well, I was going to take a slightly different spin to what Michael said. Yes, I mean, the adoption and putting ISO in is a big challenge. But one of the biggest challenges we have all the time, and any bank will have, is the question is why, right? And why we're doing it is we're doing it for the clients, the end-to-end client in the long run, right? That's why we're investing money into it. But if our clients don't understand or they're not ready for ISO, then from an investment perspective, the banks are always saying, why am I spending so much money on this if my clients aren't using it? And then it's a kind of catch-22. Then what happens is the market infrastructure forces us to do it, which is actually the good first step. And how we encounter, at least we are trying to get adoption of ISO from an end-to-end perspective, is we put in actually rules within, for example, within the links system. There's what we call Rule 16, where all banks are required to make available rich data if they're given rich data. So they're required to send, and when they receive, they're required to give it to their clients. Because from a client perspective, the clients are also saying, hey, if I'm sending to someone, but the bank is not actually giving it to them, so why bother? But at least within the Canadian environment, if I as a client give it to my bank sends it to the other bank in Canada, the other bank in Canada is forced to give it to the end client, which then we'll talk about later. What does it do for the client in the long run?
I mean, so we have two different viewpoints here, right? Because what you just said sounds wonderful, except for all the banks who will then have to go implement all these new solutions to make that happen. And then to Barry's original question about what makes this challenging, I mean, I can't imagine the size of the projects for banks to go from not doing ISO 20022 at all, let's say on Fedwire, to not just implementing it, where they might have to take a crawl, walk, run, is that right? Crawl, walk, run approach, right? Like first I'm going to translate it and do like for like, or I'm going to use a provider, Elspeth and I could talk about that, who will do that translation for me. Then I'll start adding the data. But I'm just imagining the reaction if a rule here came out and they said, actually, if you receive that data because your sender sent it, all the banks here, you have to now go update all your systems to be able to provide that and present that to your customers. I mean, I think all hell will break loose. So that makes it so much harder, right?
It makes it harder for the bank because they have to invest, but then it makes adoption of the standard much faster. And ISO is nothing new. We've been talking about this since 3 decades ago. But the reason why that it never really took off because no one was forced to do it. And if you're not forced to do it, it will not happen.
Yeah.
Elsbeth, from your perspective, what are you seeing in from your customers and in the products and services that you're able to provide?
Well, my experience personally is largely with ISO as it's being used for real-time payments. And that is very similar to what Miriam was saying, which is you have to have a driving business reason. You have to have an ROI. There has to be something compelling that's either going to save you money or provide a service that wasn't available earlier. So that's where this is going to start. However, I can also tell you that the interoperability technically internationally is there. I mean, they did a proof of concept with the clearinghouse, with the EU, and it technically worked great, right? Now, the devil's in the detail, and a proof of concept isn't a real thing, but where they ran into problems, and because it hasn't come out, the proof of concept was a couple of years ago, is that just this hurdle of return on investment. Who's going to spend the dollars to make this happen? In the United States, the spend is going to start with large companies, probably, who have needs that are not met by the market that these new payment methods will allow for. That's why real estate, who wants desperately to get away from paper checks and ACH for escrow, has a business case to start that. That's why the high risk businesses who are trying to emulate betting payoffs at the betting window, they've got a compelling reason to write checks for this kind of service because, you know, they want a specific experience. So there's just a lot of different use cases that are going to start coming to market. Earned wage access is another one that are compelling enough that people are going to be willing to invest. But in the United States, where it's not largely mandated the way it can be in Europe, in South America, or up in Canada, you really have to have market dynamics move and justify investment in order to get people to do some of this adoption. Once they do it, then they can leverage for other reasons and extend. But that's probably why this is going to be a fairly long ramp from my personal perspective to get it all the way through. And the things that will start it are having it be in place for, for SWIFT, for RTP and FedNow and chips, and then next year for FedWire, because you'll build up folks who have experience in it, who feel comfortable with it, who see the benefits of it, and then they'll look to extend. So first it's going to be the networks, and then the processors, and then other people sort of externally. That's at least that's the way I see it.
Yeah, I know. I guess just one point, and it's kind of to what I said before, because I do love the idea, Kenneth, don't get me wrong, about like the end user ultimately experiencing this. I just think that there has to be enough benefit first for the bank, like for the banks to do it themselves, like efficiencies and ways that they can save money just by implementing ISO without even it having to be that the end user is really seeing the benefit yet. So the efficiencies in the training, the operational costs, et cetera, because I think it's going to take time for it to take that journey of it getting past the banks into the end users over here. I just don't, from who we've been talking to your point, nobody's really doing that yet, right? They're just looking at implementing it within the banks themselves right now.
Right. And that's going to be for some period of time, because they're going to have to realize some benefit and then move it out. Right now, for example, Jack Henry has APIs that don't feed us ISO information coming in to generate transactions that end up going ISO to various network rails. So we're doing that translation. We're enriching the data and sending it off. You'll probably see some of that rather than expecting, a whole industry to learn ISO and play in the ISO pool first. And that goes back to what Miriam said earlier about we'll probably start with translation.
Yeah, and maybe that's where again the client needs to be educated, and they have to advocate for it. I mean, if the client needs it and it's good for them, the banks will do it. And right now, we're kind of doing it the other way around. So again, in Canada, there was huge consultancy or papers to the public, right? And a lot of huge corporates, they all answered it, and therefore, as a country, the regulator said, "Hey, it is good for the country because our large corporates needs it to speed up the supply chain," and therefore they pushed it along.
Well, some of that adoption push will come a little bit cross-border, right? So let's take Canada, for example, right? If there's push to adopt it, and I'm dealing with Canada now, and sort of a Canadian sort of supplier, right, tells me, oh, you need to put basically this unique ID, right? This end-to-end ID in the payment order, and my whatever I'm using now to initiate this can't support it, then it's like, hey, bank, tell me, what do I need to do? This company there requires this number, and they want me to put this field. I can't see it, right? Either on my electronic banking platform, ERP system, whatever it is, right? And that will sort of push this ahead, I think, also a bit further as US entities deal with, in the cross-border space, right? This could be these things. This could be, the proper reporting codes from a regulatory reporting side for cross-border payments that have a specific structure and need a specific home, and that all needs to be sort of one way or another sort of supported, right? Especially if these sort of new elements that traditionally we don't capture.
We do have one or two questions that are along the same lines coming in from the folks out there tonight. And the question goes along with this. Are efficiencies alone strong enough business case to drive large-scale adoption, or does there need to be a revenue argument?
I think this is what we were just maybe,
Thinking
I want to say
it.
arguing about, but discussing amongst ourselves. I mean, I think what we're seeing in the US is that there really isn't going to be a big enough revenue argument right now, because the revenue won't be there until there's enough adoption of it. And likely it's really a mandate, not a mandate to give it to the end users, but it's coming from RTP and FedNow are already on those standards. Chip said, we're going live on this date. You either do it or you're out. Fedwire is kind of saying the same thing. So I think we're forcing it. And then once everyone's on it, I think the revenue is what will drive moving it into the end user's hands. Like that will be revenue driven when those companies say, well, I want to see that data. So if you don't show me that data, I'm going to a bank who will.
Yeah, and from a revenue perspective, I think banks need to change their way of thinking too, because the revenue won't be on the physical payment itself, right? It's going to be on the data, what you do with the data, because data's the new gold, the new oil, I would say, right? And I think a few people have been saying that too. Data drives everything, and if you get the data, you can actually use the data to analyze, markets, demographics, a lot of things, and sell new products from a data perspective to your clients. So I think that's one of the things that, especially in Canada, we realize that, and the race to zero on payments revenue, it's happening already today, right? So we need to find ways of getting revenue in other forms out of the payment, and data is it.
Michael, what do you think?
Sorry, was on mute.
Understood.
Yeah. So, well, I agree with Miriam. There got to be some other carrot in that as well, right? For the market or for banks. So it depends a bit on the use case. It depends also on the organization, what type of customers they support, right? And what line of business they are in, right, for their customers. So there will be, I'm sure, the segments that can just afford to be slow adopters, right, of this. And there will be others that where there'll be more a bigger push, right, to adopt ISO and end to end in this space. And I think that's definitely what we'll see. This could be coming from larger clients, right, that force you to do it, or you have specific business segments, right, that see certain advantage in that space to force you to adopt it, provide the data, right. So initially, I think we'll see a little mixed adoption, I would say, right. Depends on what sort of the core business model of specific providers is, what the customer segment is, and how they start leveraging this, right. And I can imagine, right, if a bank doesn't have sort of a big wire profile out there, and they just may do domestic payments, and they can afford, right, a little bit a slower adoption than somebody who has a much more sort of international use case and footprint out there that they're trying to protect and interact with, right? So I think it will depend a bit, right, on the use cases.
That's a point we didn't talk. I mean, that other piece that we all face in our jobs, right, is this is such a large kind of group of financial institutions, whether they're larger or banks or credit unions or corporates or regionals, like it's very hard to do anything that really pushes everyone in a sphere, right? Because you end up potentially being in the position where now only the large banks can really afford to do something, but you've said everybody has to present it to their customers, and then those other guys really can't just yet. So I think that's always something in the US, at least, that I've seen that not limits us, but changes how we have to approach things to make sure that everybody can take advantage of it, even if sometimes some of the bigger banks do it fully at the start and other banks get there a little slower, or credit.
Yeah,
And
the smaller institutions. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No,
I apologize.
Got it,
I was
Elspeth.
just going to say that speaking about smaller institutions, they are really relying on their processors to provide this capability to them. So it behooves the processors to be thinking about this and making it available in a way that it can be consumed by the financial institutions. And I think you probably see that in multiple processors who are supporting FedNow, who are supporting RTP, who will be coming to market supporting the new ISO standard for wire transfer capabilities as well.
Yeah. What I was going to say is, I know when we talk about ROI, we keep talking about client revenue, what revenue can we generate, but we need to also look from another lens, is from a internal processing perspective, can I save that? From a risk perspective, I mean, one of the big things of what IS will bring from bank perspective is if everything is structured properly, I can actually sanctions filter those things, transactions much better, much faster, reducing a lot of headcount doing investigations and whatnot. But more importantly, I should be able to catch bad transactions and not get fined for it. And we know fines for compliance perspective on a big bank could be in the billions of dollars. So it is not just from a revenue perspective. We have to look at it from an internal operations and risk perspective too.
And I think that's the win right now. I think that is where most banks will get the benefit for now. It will be on that, right? The right remittance data, all of that structured data, the compliance results, the reconciliation efficiencies. I think that's where banks will see the ROI to start, and then it'll slowly get to the end user.
And we've seen those kinds of integrations. We've seen a couple of the vendors who are providing those kinds of services start with as part of their foray into supporting FedNow and RTP interdiction or fraud mitigation at the point of the transaction by asking for that ISO message to begin with, so that the integration is pulling in all that rich data natively in order to support fraud mitigation.
So kind of staying along the lines that we were just touching on. We've talked about a number of different things. How about some benefits? I know we've hinted at them back and forth. Michael, from your perspective, benefits of adopting ISO or will be achieved by using ISO going forward?
Well, I mean, talking about where Elspeth was going, right? First, at the core is obviously the business that we are in, right? From an interbank perspective, and there, the advantages of a common standard between MT and chips and Fedwire, and also faster payments, right? If they expand internationally, having the same sort of message for data format will be huge. Avoiding sort of translation and dropping off data and so forth, and having translation issues will all go away. So much cleaner traffic, more straight-through processing going forward. I think higher automation in our sanction processes, right? For sure, right? Because we have clear elements for identifying the name versus the address, the account name versus the name of the entity. So these are all things we are not able to do today, but in the new standards we will, and that enables sort of a much higher level of automation, right off the bat. And then some of the exception processes, because ISO brings some new messages, for example, dedicated return message. Very involved process today between banks. Now, once we're having this return message properly, I must say, implemented, then it has everything, right, to automate this, right? It has the underlying data of the original transfer, how it's being returned, the reference information, right? And you can build really a nice automated process around that. And finally, we talk a lot about payments, but the next step will be automation of all other exception investigation processes. So new message types are there out for those as well, to move whatever we do today in a very free format way through free format MT199, 299, and Fedwire service messages. All that would also then move to a very structured approach. Even where there's a need for a request for information, right, from a compliance check. Even that can then be sort of automatically sent to say, here are the 3 data elements I need. Well, then you can automatically also respond to that, right, if you have the capabilities. So I think that will help us to sort of go closer to a zero-touch process eventually, even where we have exceptions. So that's really where we can draw some of the benefits, right, off the bat if we implement this properly.
Yeah. I'm a client-facing guy, so I always have to advocate for the client, right? So everything that Michael talked about is about speeding up the processing of the payment, which is great for the client. But what's very important to the client, especially the large corporates, is the data itself. Imagine if I could upload, from an AP system, I download and throw it all into the payment systems, all that data, invoice data and everything goes through. I can upload into my ERP system as a receiver. It cuts down all my reconciliation. I know what I'm being paid for, which means I can release goods faster. I can release credit faster, which eventually makes the supply chain go faster, which benefits everyone. That's the key to ISO. It's the data again, and speeding up the way the supply chain so the business runs more efficiently, faster. And if everything runs faster, you actually save costs. Costs, cost of funds when you hold the credit line for so long, or you don't have it and you have to go borrow to actually make payments. Imagine if your credit lines get released faster, your goods get released faster, you can sell it faster and you make money faster again.
That's the end goal everyone has to see, right? Like we
That's
might not
right.
get there tomorrow. It depends on how things are implemented. Returns, right? Requests for returns. These are all out there already on RTP and Fed now. They're not being utilized so well yet. The end goal is when they are, everything Kenneth just said will happen, right? Everybody can streamline everything. I do think there's benefits before we even get there though. Like to your point, so you said you're focused on the client. So my client is banks. So I'm very focused on the banks. I think there's benefits for the banks right away. Like before they even have to sell this to their customers, making all those efficiencies, there are so many benefits to just, they'll have all their rails. Okay, granted, not ACH yet, which is a different story, but many of their rails, all of their instant money that's moving or real-time money that's moving on one standard, and they can just streamline so much from an operations perspective when it comes to that. Like every bank has a different back office for every system, right? Maybe that can start being streamlined. It's all going to be on the same standard. It's all going to be using the same type of structure, the same type of data. There's a lot of efficiencies there that banks can start using, and no more trying to say like, well, I need to go hire that FAME expert and I need to go hire that, ISO FedNow expert. And then no, you just need people who understand ISO, and then that actually can be supported across the board. So I think there's a lot from that perspective. And then to your point on compliance and such, so this is just going to make things so much easier for banks to be compliant, to run the right scans, to do it fast. In the age of instant payments, everything is about fast. So without the right structure and the right formatting there, I don't think that you really could meet what an instant payment is supposed to be, because you're not going to be able to meet those SLAs and do it quickly and run the right scan, because the data is not going to be structured and you're going to have all these type of like exceptions. So only with these type of standards can we truly get to that kind of new age of money moving so fast. But I do agree that eventually we want to get to where everything's moving across the board fast and the transparency is there. I mean, that's another thing, right? This provides transparency across the chain that the payment goes through. So the data can constantly move through it without like a second system. We all know Swift has like another system you can use to track your payment. With ISO, the standard, like you can just see it all with the payment. So it brings everything together.
So we do have a question out there, and I'll try to do my best to interpret it. In trying to attract international corporate clients that everybody wants, do you see corporate clients moving because a bank, either as an early adopter of ISO 20022 or will move them because they're slow in adopting ISO 20022?
I think it depends on the corporate, right? As I said, if they're banking in 5, 10 different countries and every country is a little bit different, then not so important, I would say. But then it's also what they're doing with the payment. So if that bank or that corporate is part of a supply chain and they can force everyone onto that platform, whatnot, standards are the most important thing again.
Absolutely, yeah.
And we had this always years ago, right, where there were RFPs from corporates. We had to do this as a bank. Now it wasn't sort of on file act and so forth, right? We had to do a lot of translation as banks, right? Definitely on the statement side. They just wanted already these ISO statements with the rich data and required a lot of mappings and standardizations, because the legacy formats didn't have this, right? So we had to do a lot of massaging of the data. Well, if it comes now all in ISO format, right? Okay, let's leave ACH to the side for a moment. Then this becomes already right there, right? Quicker to do it, right? To onboard a new client or a new process, because it's already in that standard, right? So then mapping it in these outbound statement reporting formats is so much easier, and then the corporate gets the value right away, right, from that side. So yes, I think it will be a decision. Well, it is a decision point for corporates, especially if they're already heavy ISO adopters.
I mean, a corporate client's never going to look at us or at any bank and say, if you don't adopt ISO 20022, I'm leaving you, right? But what they're going to do is leave if their competitor can do something they can't do. So
Right.
ultimately, like that's what, right? So I always laughed because back in the days when I was working on FedNow, they're like, well, people are going to leave you if you can't offer FedNow. Nobody's going to care if you can offer FedNow. It's when they're going to say, oh, wait, I can't do my business on Saturday, but my competitor can. I'm
Yeah,
going
there you
there.
go.
So when ISO starts enabling some corporate customers to do things to save a ton of money, and their competitor goes, why the hell can't I do that? Wait, my bank doesn't let me do it? Well, then I'm going to a different bank.
Yeah, it's all about being able to drive the car off the lot in the evening and on Saturday and Sunday. It's all about being able to do your home closing on the weekend. It's all about what the outcome is about whether someone's going to move or not. And I just want to say one thing about NACHA and ACH and ISO. There is a translation. They have published a translation from NACHA to ISO. The issue is that in a 94 character file, you only have so much data. So yes, it can be converted one way or another, but it doesn't have that additional data unless you're pulling in from, some of those addenda records and that sort of thing. So there is a path, and they're proud of having built that translator, but I'm not sure how that's going to be used in the wild because I haven't seen it used.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have or not, Ken or Michael.
Can't really comment to that. But what I was going to say was, from an ISO perspective, is it helps pave innovation too, because the baseline needs to be standard. So the thing that was hot then went cold and it's getting hot again is open banking, right?
Yep.
For banks and everyone to talk and build their API so you can build a proper open banking community is the standardization of the data first too. Otherwise, you don't know what you're asking for, you don't know what you build, and then every time you build an API and says, hey, I can get this data, but what does it actually mean? Don't know, right? So that is another part of why ISO is just the foundational work for a lot of innovation in the future.
Yeah, I will say,
I'm sorry.
I guess one just comment to Kenneth's point is, like, Form 3 is an API-based solution. And we don't only support systems that are ISO 20022 compliant, but my God, it's so much easier when they are. Like it really does make it easier. It's easier to align to get all the right data out. And when we have a system, let's say BACS in the UK, right, that's not on it yet, or even FPS that hasn't moved there yet, it makes it much, much harder to kind of align that, especially as, to your point, we're trying to innovate to streamline that you can use like one API across the board. Well, for all the ISO systems out there, that's pretty easy to do. Some nuances, like we said, RTP FedNow don't exactly match, fields are used differently, but there's still the same data content underlying that global standard. And then we have a different system that doesn't use it. And now there's all sorts of mappings we have to do to try to make it all work the same. When they're all on ISO 20022, we'll be able to streamline that more. And all the innovators, all the vendors out there will be able to do the same thing. So just enhancing your point.
You've gotten a couple of questions. Go ahead, Elspeth. I'm sorry.
No, I was just agreeing.
It was just agreeing with me.
I was just
okay.
agreeing
Right.
with
Okay.
Miriam,
Okay.
which we tend to do.
We have gotten, and I know it's been mentioned once or twice, but we've gotten a couple of questions about about ACH and ACH adoption of ISO and what that means, or because they're not adopting it, what that means. Anybody want to comment on that?
I mean, Elspeth already kind of said it all. I do.
Yeah.
The flip side, I do think it's impactful a bit. I mean, to be honest, especially in the future as we go down this path and everything goes to ISO and it's not on ISO, there is a mapping, to be fair. That being said, Fedwire, CHIPS, RTP, FedNet, like these are all real time, right? Some instant, some not instant, but they're all real time transactions. ACH is a more timely, not timely, lack of timely, I don't know the right words. It's batch. Yeah, but it's payments that take a longer time by default. So trying, the whole like streamline efficiency, make it faster, it's not going to work on ACH as well. Like using ISO and ACH isn't going to have all the same benefits as what I was trying to say out there in a really bad way, right? That it will.
From a speed maybe, but then again, from an end client perspective, the client might say, I'm doing payroll, I'm doing something, I don't need it instant, but I need my reconciliation data to go through. So again, with ISO, there are two parts, and payments are two parts of it. One is processing of the payment. It could be fast, it could be slow, but the other part is the data that the client needs to do the reconciliation. And that's why I'll just talk about Canada again right now is, as an industry here, we've already agreed that every payment system is going to be ISO. So our RTGS, which is links, is full ISO. Our Interact, which is one of our few faster payment system, has gone ISO. The real-time rail, when it is coming up, is going to be ISO, and it's all going to be the same standard of ISO too, based on CBPR plus. We are having a project right now to look at all our batch system, which is the equivalent to our ACH in the US, which is going to be mandated to be ISO, and the base ISO is also CBPR plus, so that it creates interoperability between all the systems. And more importantly, it simplifies things for the client, because the client doesn't need to know 5 different formats. With one format, they say, okay, bank, either you choose which rail it goes through, because I've given you my the features I want. Is it fast? Is it slow? Is it this? Is it that? But they don't have to create different files for the different payment types.
Yeah, and that helps with smart routing, right? Where give me one, and I put it in these little buckets, right? You don't need to worry about it. And the data I'm giving you back, it's all the same format, right? And then in the US, our ACH will stick out a bit. And the other interesting thing on our batch system, well, they keep adding settlement cycles, right? It used to be next day. Now we have multiple same-day cycles, and before you know it, it's every 30 minutes. Some countries actually going this way, and it's competitive. Before you know it, it shrinks down the difference, and then having different formats becomes more noticeable, right? It's say wires today and ACH is tomorrow, right? Then fine. But we've seen this already. No, we have implemented, right? Same-day ACH, keep adding these settlement cycles, and more to come, right? And that might increase the need, right, to really have on a common format even more.
So I was trying.
Just a quick question.
I do agree with everything you guys are saying. Like, as much as it's slower, yes, there would be tons of benefits if we were using ISO 2022 there also.
So, Ken, we did get a question. I know you threw an acronym out there that a lot of people probably don't know, CBPR plus. Let's take a second or two here and tell everybody about that.
Sure thing. ISO 2022 to me is a language. It is not a standard. It's like English is a language, but British English is different from American English. The word pavement, you drive on the pavement in the UK, but you walk on the pavement in the US, right? So CBPR plus, it's a it's a standard where the whole world, or it says everyone uses British English, and therefore the meaning of the word is exactly the same wherever you use it. So CBPR Plus is what Swift adopted for the cross-border payments. And in the world of, very global world we work in right now, cross-border payments are very, very important, and they must be able to go through the local systems too. And therefore, if the local systems all adopt the same cross-border standard, then you know that the information can go through and there'll be proper interoperability.
Thanks, Ken. So, Michael, that kind of dovetails nicely with some of the work that you folks, you as the co-chair or you as the Payments Market Practice Group. How do you see ISO 20022 changing the global payments landscape?
Yeah, we've put a lot of effort, right, in pushing sort of the common rollout, right, of ISO 2022 in a common way. It's better to say, right? CBPR plus is sort of how that is expressed, and then also working with the high-value payment systems, to develop and work on this high-value payment systems plus HVPS plus equivalent of that to make sure it becomes all interoperable. So that's still something, whereas there are minor differences, as we talked about earlier, for us in the industry, Payment Market Practice Group and other groups to work on to really further that alignment. But that also means if we want to do changes, and well, as innovation carries on, we talked about it, I'm sure all of us will come up with new requirements, and maybe we'll find out that some of the data that we would like to see are not yet part of the standard. And then we need to go through change management process. And that will be harder now, right? Because now we want to commit ourselves to do this sort of on a global level, right? And also keep the local systems aligned with that. So we have some good traction there with the High Value Payments Plus working group that's sort of committing different high value payment systems to be part of that journey, right? To ensure we're staying sort of aligned with that going forward. But practice will show, right, how this can be achieved. So there is more work in a sense sort of on the horizon as we get there. And then further developments we definitely see, and there's all your interest, right? Because right now we talk about payments, cash management, reporting messages, but then also other market segments are interested in this and saying, well, these guys are doing quite successful. Think about the trade space. So they're also exploring that. Oh, should we adopt ISO 2022 for our messages, right? FX, securities, for example, they're all sort of looking at that to get that benefit. That if the data elements on the cash side are the same exactly and they map nicely also on securities, then this all becomes a lot more efficient from a settlement reporting side. Same in trade, foreign exchange. So we'll see more of that, right? The sort of the success we're having now, right, in this segment, trickle down, right, also to the other financial instruments that are taking a hard look, right, when they should take that step.
Miriam, we're kind of running out of time. It's amazing how fast this time has gone. But Miriam, Elsbeth, can you help? How are you helping your customers understand the impacts and implications and get ready for ISO 20022?
Well, I can just say that the smaller institutions aren't ready internally for ISO 20022. So we, as Jack Henry, as a processor, take care of the development of it and the generation of it to support specific payment rails. And that's probably going to happen for some period of time. And then as we extend that use of that format, we will probably share data with other providers, third-party providers that are providing additional services. And then eventually we will probably have APIs that are ISO 20022 derived to get into the financial institution. But right now we're kind of keeping them protected from it. And then I assume there's going to be a transition in the future.
I mean, and it's similar. So I think after this whole conversation, it might not be what everyone wants to hear, but our role is to somewhat protect the banks a bit, right? Especially with the creation of these messages and stuff, but also enable them. So similarly, we are the ones that are creating the ISO messages on behalf of banks and such, right? And we expose all the data to them via an API. We get all the data to them from an API. But what we are doing is making sure that those APIs are ISO 20022 compliant. So banks can and should start that journey to use as much of the data as they can and expose as much of the data as they can. So kind of giving them the ability to meet the mandates, meet the timeframes that are out there, get on the standard, right, with these rails, but then also start taking advantage, some slower than others, right? Some are going to do it just right away, and they're actually going with kind of new cores and new modern solutions that can take advantage of all this data, and some aren't yet. And the ones who are doing it the first way will get more benefits at the start. And the ones who are doing it the second day can still get a lot of those efficiency saving benefits we talked about. So compliance scanning that we can do for them because we have all the data and efficiencies and reconcilement on the bank's side. All of those are still benefits they can get. And then they will slowly start adding kind of their customer benefits as they take advantage of the data in the API.
As I said, the time has really flown by. We've gotten through less than half of what we thought we would.
We warned you. We warned you, Barry.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. But in closing this portion of the session, there's 219 business days left before Fed implements ISO 20022. What advice would you give the audience with regards to implementing it?
Start now.
You're already behind, I think. But
Yeah.
If you're starting now, call me or call Elspeth. Like just
Yeah. Yeah, it's if you're going to do it on your own, you have ramp time to understand the standard. You just have a lot of work to do. So if you're waiting late and you know there's going to be a hard cutover, then you're probably going to need to have a processor help you out.
Yeah, for sure. You need a good partner. I mean, totally agree. If you're now thinking about it, you need a strong partner, right? You still need to understand it, by the way, right? Because your internal business processes, whatever, you need to obviously be familiar with it, but you will need a partner that has done it many times to ensure you're there. And there's still obviously the testing effort, right? And that's very important and critical to get certified by the Fed on this. And that's obviously part of the whole preparation.
Yeah, and I think because there's so many banks and everyone doing ISO right now, resources, SMEs in this segment are hard to find. You need to scoop them up really quickly.
Or be prepared to grow your own, which
Yeah.
takes time.
Which
And
takes
people may have to do it.
Well, what we've talked about here is that the payments ecosystem continues to change and evolve, and it's being driven by a whole bunch of different pressures from regulators, intense competition, new entrants, and customers who are now expecting the payments to be instant, frictionless, and account to account. And to address these challenges and meet the needs of clients, a modern payment infrastructure is required and a payments language, and that, as we've just talked about, is ISO 20022. And I want to thank the panel for sharing their knowledge, experience, and expertise and insights on how ISO 20022 is and will continue to change the financial payments ecosystem.